Today, we become legends.
So a new season has dropped and it's time to update the top 3 gods for every role for the latest patch, 9.3. As always, this list takes from multiple sources to get as much of a broad overview of the meta as possible. That includes my own games, SPL, popular content creator and streamer opinions, and a couple other factors that go into it like pick ban rate and my own personal spin. If you enjoy these top 3 gods for every role videos and want to stay updated on the meta throughout all of season 9, why not subscribe to the channel so you can get notifications whenever I drop a new video. But without further ado, let's jump in with our top junglers. Dropkicking his way into the first spot for jungle, we have Gilgamesh. I'm sure he doesn't need too much explaining. Great sustained damage, great burst damage, great mobility, even solid CC. There's just not too much that Gilgamesh doesn't have, and even after a lot of nerfs, he's still seeing reliable play in the SPL as a jungler. Not so much as a solo laner anymore, but in my opinion he can still kind of work there too, but jungle is by far his best role at the moment. Next up we have a fairly new addition to the roster, and that's CLIODHNA. So I'll say right off the bat that CLIO-SOLO is also really good, arguably almost as good as her jungle, but I don't like to duplicate gods into multiple roles for the list, so she'll just be mentioned in the jungle section for the list. I recently got into playing Clio a bit myself, and her damage output is some of the highest in the game, especially for objective burn with the ults and stuff. All 4 abilities do very high damage, and Clio is pretty safe overall, having one of the best dashes in the game, as well as of course her wall mechanics to slip into and out of fights. The only thing Clio lacks is good CC, but if that can be filled elsewhere on the team, she's an absolute monster to deal with both from jungle and solo. And finally, the third spot for jungle is a familiar face. ERLANG SHEN has pretty much been a solid jungler forever, and this is one of those metas where he's shining brighter than normal and is a top meta jungler. This god's damage output is just not okay for the amount of CC and utility that he has in his kit, and it's strong at almost any stage of the game. The only slight issue with ERLANG is late game when he has trouble getting on people, and no CC immunity on the ult can hurt him pretty bad in terms of getting counterpicked by stuff like Daji. He's also an AA jungler that can make great use of the strong basic attack synergy items right now like Berserkers and Shoguns. Even if ERLANG doesn't build Shoguns, his team get much more value from building it. And quickly before we move on, honourable mention to Bastet, who's still very strong after the rework and again works in solo fairly well too. And Daji also gets a mention too, as she's spotting a very high win rate and being banned in the SPL pretty frequently as a counterpick. But speaking of solo, let's cover those frontliners next. So the first solo is an obvious one, it's Shiva. This god released way too strong and the current nerfs aren't enough to bring him down from a top 3 solo placement. His chain knockups are so hard to deal with, and the flexibility he brings with his ult is almost unrivaled by any other god. He can heal, do damage, CC, buff his team, debuff enemies. There just isn't much that Shiva doesn't do well. For this reason, he's also a decent jungler at present too, but a better solo laner, so that's where I'm putting him for the list. Next up is a pick that's really shot into the meta lately and started dominating. It's been a while since we've seen a magical solo be top 3 solidly, but in my opinion, ARTIO deserves this spot right now. She's seeing absolutely tons of SPL and SCC play, as well as getting banned fairly often. She brings a ton of control to the team and pretty much stalemates any matchup she's in. There are matchups she wins, but there aren't really any she loses super hard. ARTIO is just a solid, flexible pick, and if you want a magical solo right now, she's definitely the best available. So this final spot for solo was very hard to choose between 4 common and strong picks right now: Camazotz, BELLONA, Cthulhu, and Cabrakan. I ultimately went with BELLONA as she sees more overall play and more bans than the other 3 right now, but keep in mind that Cthulhu and Cabrakan specifically are both great too. As for BELLONA though, I touched on this slightly with ERLANG in the jungle section, but BELLONA is just perfect as a vessel to build the strong attack speed items like Zerg Shield and Shoguns, and that's boosting her prevalence quite a bit. Add in a Frostbound and she can just stick to people for way too long in fights once they burn their jump and just cause havoc in the enemy backline. But moving on, let's talk about the elephant in the room, mid lane. Right now, mid is super impactful and its top gods are insanely strong. THOTH is the first mid that immediately comes to mind for me. His ranged poke is just insane, and with the current itemization for mages combined with his free penetration on the passive, allow him to just shred almost anything, especially in the early game. The usual risk of THOTH applies though, in that he's not the safest mid there is, and once your dash is burned, be that defensively or aggressively, you're in a rough spot if you get dived on, especially given the no CC immunity on the ultimate. But that risk is worth taking for the insane damage output, wave clear, and pressure that THOTH brings to a team. The next mid is a newer one, and that's TIAMAT. So this god sort of feels like she has an answer to any situation, and it's just a matter of knowing the god and the game well enough to capitalize. With effectively 10 abilities at her disposal that are all solid in their own right, she can almost always wiggle out of a situation with a win. She's also just tankier than most mages by default due to her hardened scales mechanic, reducing the damage she takes. Overall, TIAMAT is a great mid right now, and if you're confident you can play her well, definitely spam her in ranked. That is assuming she's not banned. So the final mid pick was a bit of a mess. Mid is such a strong role right now, and the items are so great that it means a ton of mid lane mages are really strong right now, and filling just 3 spots is difficult. Zeus, Agni, Hebo, Morgan Le Fay, and Merlin are all great mid laners right now, depending on your playstyle and preference. Zeus just has the damage and can even build a bit more bruiser with some of the good magical hybrid items right now. Agni just has insane damage, especially over walls, and works great with the OP mage items like Flat Pen Rush right now. Hebo just got his self root removed and was already strong in my opinion, so he's definitely going to be really good. Morgan Le Fay is near impossible to dive and has insane range. Even Persephone has great merit right now to be played. But it's actually Merlin that I picked for this spot. Merlin's been seeing a ton of SPL play lately, and of course works great with early Flat Pen and especially Soul Reaver, since he has effectively 6 different damaging abilities that can proc Reaver, and that's not even counting his ult. His objective burn is some of the best of any mage, even though his actual objective secure is beaten out by a lot of other ones. A bit like Thoth, he has great ranged poke and options, but if Flicker's cooldown gets forced and the enemy jungle or solo gets on you, it's going to be a rough time. But that's pretty much any mage really, and Merlin's upsides definitely warrant a pick right now if you want to climb from mid. And finally, let's cover that duo lane. Supports are up first, and the first support will surprise literally no one. Yep, YEMOJA's still really good. She's one of the few gods in Smite that genuinely take a lot of skill to pull off well, so if you can play YEMOJA competently, you will absolutely dominate with her. She fundamentally breaks the game, and how quickly she can spam out heals, shields, CC, and damage. The ult, when used well in teamfights, is like a better Odin cage in the jungle because of the Omi regen. She's been strong since her release and remains strong now, definitely a worthy top 3 placement. From a new release that's been strong ever since, to a more shaky release that's just recently showed his dominance, Atlas has been dominating both in ranked and SPL, even being banned pretty frequently in both. That gravity well is honestly his defining feature, but it's so damn strong that it often just kills people it hits because of how much control you have over where the enemy goes. Especially with the added knock-up immunity the ability was given, it's just much harder to interrupt. Overall, Atlas is just a really solid support right now that has pretty much everything you'd need. So again, this final placement was difficult, and I considered Geb and Khepri as possible top 3s given their high pick ban rates right now and how they're a bit of a meta call to counter all the burst damage coming from mages. However, I think overall Fafnir is seeing more consistent play, especially recently. With a lot of AA junglers like ERLANG Shen and solos like Bellona going around nowadays, and even Sol mid being fairly popular, having that team-wide attack speed steroid in Fafnir's Dragon Coerce is invaluable, and even just a single target coerce onto your ERLANG or Gilgamesh jungle and you're off to the races. Not to mention it's just insane for burning down objectives in Dragon form. You can just burn structures in 5 seconds flat. But Fafnir also still has his signature double stun in Dragon form and a ton of other utility that just makes him a great support for the current meta. And finally, let's cover some ADCs. The whole role has been kind of up in the air lately, with new ADCs being experimented with very frequently, and the ones that were called good a month ago not even being seen anymore, so it's difficult to make a call on some of these. Medusa is my first and easiest placement though. She's been seeing the most consistent play and really loves the Crusher starts right now. Her 1 with Crusher hits so insanely hard, and having that extra bit of attack speed doesn't hurt either. High lane pressure and ability to spread anti-heal with the change to her 2 allows her to not only box better into the enemy hunter's lifesteal, but in teamfights she can make much more of an impact when it comes to anti-healing, with it being on her 2 instead of her 3. CERNUNNOS is my second hunter, and this one is a bit of a wild card. He makes great use of the current hunter builds and is seeing a huge spike in SPL play very recently, which tipped him over some of my honourable mention hunters. This could be because he's picked as a last resort when the better hunters are banned or picked, but I've definitely seen him picked over some more common meta gods recently, and it seems like he's in a transition to the top. And finally, we have a personal pick of mine that's reinforced by the world champion ADC. That's right, ULLR is once again one of my top ADCs. I know I consistently put ULLR pretty high on these lists even when most people don't agree he's meta, but right now I think he's undervalued for the burst damage he brings to the scene, and to me, ULLR is just consistently underrated by people. But if you're not into the playstyle of ULLR with that bursty, ability-based kind of style, maybe try Charybdis, Apollo, or Izanami, who are my honourable mention picks for the ADC role, all of which are solid picks in the current meta. But that's all I got for the top 3 gods for every role in patch 9.3. This is the first update to the series since season 9 dropped, and the meta is still pretty unstable, with things falling out of and jumping into the meta on a regular basis. But I thought I'd at least put one of these out since we're now 3 patches into the new season. Subscribe to catch my next update as soon as it drops, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.